Angie. Welcome to the first episode of the BDB, or Big Damn Book Review, at least for my YouTube channel. As I mentioned in another video, I used to do this as a written review for the very first book blog I started up on Blogger years ago, and it was kind of a popular feature that I used to do because I talked about books that a lot of people were hesitant to get into sheerly because of the size. I don't mind big books. They might take me a while to get through, but if they interest me, I don't mind dedicating the time from time to time to read them in their entirety. I just have to sort of set the goal to make a project of it sometimes. So this series, obviously you won't see these episodes a lot because it takes time to get through these books, but every so often I'll put up an episode of some big damn book that I was able to get through. This particular episode, I'm going to start with Mark Helprin's Winter's Tale, because I've heard a lot of people that are interested in this book, but because of the size, they don't know if they want to commit the time to it. So I figured I'd talk about it here, and if it sounds like something you're into, then you'll have something to go off of. And I will try to keep it as spoiler-free as possible. There may be a little bit where I kind of veer a little into spoiler territory, but I will try to keep out of it as much as I can. Because this book is nearly 750 pages long in this paperback edition, I have a lot to cover, obviously, but I will edit this down. This video may feel a little bit all over the... I'll try to fix it in editing so that it's linear as possible, but with 750 pages there's a lot to cover. I hope you don't mind if I'm kind of like this in certain areas. Also, fun time-lapse trick you can watch. You can watch the window behind me and see the sun going down because it's about dusk right now, so that'll give you a good estimation about how long I've been yammering on about this. But like I said, I will try not to get too crazy with these, but with the size of these books we're going to talk about in these episodes, can't help but have them run a little bit long, right? Where to start with this book? This book, it mainly deals with the story of Peter Lake, but there's also two other character storylines that go on in the story, which partly explains the length of the book. Is there's actually 3 different character lives you get to know about, and I think they're divided up by character sections. I'll start with Peter. Peter has an interesting backstory. His parents come over, I forget where. I want to say they're like Eastern European or something. This story starts out in late 19th century New York City, and Peter's parents have come over from somewhere in Europe and hit Ellis Island, and they are one of the thousands of people turned away for illnesses. I think they're both considered consumptive, which is just another way of saying they have TB or tuberculosis. And so they're not allowed in the country past Ellis Island. Peter's mother tries to talk to the guard and say, "Can you take my son, at least let my son live here?" And he's like, "We can't take a baby. You have to take your baby with you." So they get shipped back onto a boat going back to Europe. But before the boat takes off, Peter's dad is walking around the ship and he finds this model of the ship they're on. Conveniently, the model of the ship is just big enough to fit a baby on it. He steals the model ship, carves out a hole in the middle of it, puts Peter in it, and just sends him off towards the shore of New York City. And then we're left to presume that Peter's parents go back to Europe and die if they're consumptive, I'm guessing. But we don't hear from them again in the storyline. Peter is picked up by a group of fishermen. The colony is called the Baymen. That's just what they call everybody, men, women, and children that are in this community that's sort of off the coast of New York. They live on this little island fishing community. And Peter lives with them till he's about 12, I think. And then they decide, "You know what, Peter, you need to go out in town and find your way." So they basically kick him out of the community and say, "You need to go to town and find your own way in life. So Peter goes to New York City, doesn't know anybody, has no connections, has never associated with anybody but the Baymen because he's lived with them since he was an infant. So he's just out wandering around. He gets picked up by this guy, Pearlie Soames, who is the leader of this gang called the Short Tales. You may have heard books about that period in New York where there was like the famous gangs of New York. We made a whole movie about it with Daniel Day-Lewis and all that. That period. The Short Tales in this story are one of those gangs. They go around robbing people and committing petty crime and making a living that way and trying to evade the police, obviously. Peter is sort of blackmailed into joining the Short Tales because he's sort of in the wrong place at the wrong time, gets caught up in a crime, and Pearlie sees him there, and Pearlie offers the protection of the Short Tales, but Peter has to join the Short Tales or get turned into the police by Pearlie. So Peter starts this life of crime with the Short Tales, and everything is alright with him until Pearlie decides they're gonna go try to rob the Baymen colony of gold that they think the Baymen have. At this point, even though Peter hasn't been with the Baymen for a number of years, he still feels loyalty to them because they raised him. So he decides he's not going to be part of the Short Tales anymore, and he tries to leave. The story opens with Peter being chased not only by the Short Tales but also by the police, and his escape is aided by this magical white horse that shows up out of nowhere and takes him off. And that sort of kicks off the fantastical element of the story. So there's a lot of magical realism going on in this story, a lot of symbolism that goes on. At one point, Peter, he's still struggling to make his way on the streets, basically, because he has no one to take him in after he leaves the Short Tales. He breaks into the house of Beverly Penn. Beverly's father is really wealthy. At the time, Beverly's father is out of town at his country estate. Beverly is left home alone at the house. She has TV. Peter breaks into her house, but because Beverly, I think at the time she's like 20, 21 maybe, really young, and she's been isolated from a lot of society because of her TB, and so when she runs into Peter in her home, she's so desperate for human contact that she's more curious about him than alarmed that he's robbing her house. And so oddly, a friendship and then later a romantic relationship develops between Beverly and Peter from this attempted robbery. Peter ends up being a very important part of Beverly's short life. And it's not a spoiler to say that Beverly doesn't live too long in the story, because it tells you right on the back that she dies, because that is one thing that spurs him and plays a big part in his story. After Beverly's death, Peter kind of vanishes from the storyline for a little bit. We don't really know what happened to him exactly. They stopped talking about him for a while in the book. And then we run into Hardesty, who comes from a really wealthy family. After Hardesty's father dies, he and his brother are up for the family fortune, but Hardesty doesn't really like the way the family is becoming uber materialistic. His father had money, but he still was grounded in very good principles, and once his father dies, everybody is just consumed with money and how to make more money. And Hardesty, he doesn't really work that way, so he ends up just splitting for a while. He just splits town and goes and rides the rails and becomes a hobo for a while to try to find what was important to him again. So there's a large part of that with his story. And then the other story is Virginia, who grows up in this community called Lake of the Coheries, which is where Beverly's father had his country estate. And it's this kind of magical place where you don't really get into the community unless the people of the community want you in. It's it has this, again, it's not entirely explained. It's sort of left up to the reader's imagination what's going on, but it's just hinted that there's this sort of protective atmospheric bubble, and these people that live in this community have a very magical quality to them. I mean, it's not said that they're like witches or anything. It's just very fantastical. It's almost like an Eden on Earth, kind of. And Beverly comes from that community, and it's supposed to be somewhere sort of in the country away from New York City, but not too far away. You know, they can drive to it. It's sort of on the outskirts of town. I'm guessing the locations are kind of vague in the storyline, but it's sort of in the country end of New York, but close to New York City. Virginia decides she wants to leave like the Coherys for a while and go into town and see what kind of life she can make there. It's Hardesty eventually decides he wants to join society again and take up his father's legacy and all that. So then their stories sort of intersect. Then it's through them you start to see connections. Because when you first get into their stories, it's like, okay, who are these people? Why are they here? What happened to Peter? But as the story progresses, you start to see where the connections are and why they're important to the story and why they were brought in. After a while, after we've gotten to really know Hardesty and Virginia, then Peter's storyline comes back in. Again, it's very mysterious. Like, his exit was really weird. His re-entrance into the story is almost just as sudden, where it's like, hey, I'm back. But we don't know where Peter went, and when he comes back, he's not entirely himself. He seems to have this amnesia. He has trouble speaking. He doesn't remember what happened to him, where he went, or why he showed up when he did. And that, again, starts up the story as to what is Peter's real purpose in his life, and why has he come back when he's come back, and what happened to him and all that. So there's a lot of mysterious questions that the reader gets to know, but over a long period of time. This is definitely, this book won't move super fast for a lot of people. It's definitely a slow, makes you think kind of book with a very slow burn to it. Even though it takes a while to work through the book, there's so much going on that makes it such a worthwhile read. I mean, it delves into the seedier side of that time period in New York City, late 19th century, with the gangs and the shady politics and all that, the underground crime scene, that kind of thing. It gets into that. There's a lot of literary symbolism that's used that I thought was really impressive. One of the big symbols in the story is this magical white horse that throughout the story, he's kind of like Peter. He shows up during different parts of the story. He leaves and then he comes back, and he shows up and then he leaves, and he sort of weaves in and out of the story. But kind of like the cloud cover, his presence seems to signify something important about to happen. And his presence itself, he as a horse definitely seems otherworldly, because he seems indestructible. One of the things that was really hard for me about this book is they talk about how horses were really needed during the time period, but how a lot of people tended to abuse them. And there is one scene in this book that, or a couple scenes actually, that talk about severe abuse that happens to the regular horses. And one thing that triggers the people in the story that this white horse is special, is that he seems indestructible. It's sad, but it's also powerful, the symbolism behind it, that how no matter what these people do to this horse, he keeps coming back, and he keeps helping people. Just when you think that's it, that he can't live through that, he shows up again. So the horse itself becomes a sort of symbol of strength and perseverance of spirit. That idea that you can push through bullying and just fight it with I don't know if like indifference, but you just let it roll off of you basically and say, I'm stronger than that. And there's this idea of beauty and sincerity of a soul being able to stamp out evil in the world and violence, being able to fight sort of world apathy and violence with strength of character and the beauty in that. There's also a lot of mysteries within the story that as the reader you keep reading because you want answered. Like they talk about this mysterious cloud cover that comes over New York, and it only comes every so often, and it looks, in the book they say, it looks different than like when just a normal storm is coming in. Whenever people see it, they know there's something that feels supernatural about it. Whenever this cloud cover comes in, it seems like along with it, something either shows up or something is taken away. Something or someone is either shows up or is taken away, or both. And somebody's life is affected pretty significantly whenever this cloud cover comes in, but nobody knows what it stems from. And so you want to read the story to figure out what is the secret behind that. A few of the issues I had with the story. One of the things that frustrated me was the figuring out the passage of time within the storyline. There's not a lot of guideline for the reader to give them an idea of how much time has passed in between each character's storyline. I'm guessing here, but I feel like within about the first 270 pages, I think roughly a century has passed. There is kind of an immortal quality to Peter. I mean, that's the only way I can describe it, because like I said, his character sort of leaves and comes back, and there's no real way to think of him otherwise with the passage of time and the description of some of the things that characters have. It's like they talk about the people going from like horse-drawn carriages to the types of cars people are driving later in the story. It feels like it's about 100 years or so, so there's no real way to look at Peter other than he was gifted some sort of immortality to leave and come back, but you don't know where he went. The timeline kind of frustrated me because there's a few story clues, but it's not that clearly laid out. So that drove me batty a little bit. Also, there were some passages in the story that went on a little long for me as far as description and just overall detail. There's a fine line in writing, especially when books get this big, where it's really good up to a point, and then after a while it's like, all right, I get it, what happened? There were some parts that, while they were very prettily written, they just didn't seem overall vital to what was going on. So there were a few passages in there where I was skimming a little bit because I got the gist of what he was saying. Back to what I really did like. There was also a lot of social commentary. Not blatant, it didn't beat you over the head or anything, but there was social commentary in here that I really liked. The way that Mark Helprin phrased it, it gave you things to think about just in society today as you're reading this story. Maybe this as just a example. There was one part in here that I thought was the perfect description of how the media can influence people so much. One character said, "Mr. DePinto, the dog who protects sheep, quickly learns how to direct them, and it becomes a habit. The people have been trained by their watchmen to jump and to trample what the watchmen want trampled." It's just like, damn, that's something to think about. These media outlets are out there telling you what you should think is important and what you should be angry about, and people get in such a habit of having it force-fed to them that they forget how to think for themselves, and the media feeds off of that and says, oh, we have them now, they're sheep, they can go out and do what we like. And that just slammed me when I read that. It just struck me as the perfect analogy that yes, the media can be like the shepherd dog guiding the sheep into the pen. So there's a lot of like little things about that. There's also a lot of quiet intellectual humor that he works into it, where it's just kind of like, oh, that's clever, and just Mark Helprin's writing style in general is so poetic. I was just floored at some of the sentences he puts together in this story. Like, for instance, there was one line, I forget what they were talking about, but he had the phrase, the melancholy of moonlight, which was just sounded like a painting to me. And there's just a million lines like that in this story. Just to give you an idea, I thought I would read one passage like that struck me, where it says, "Tears came to her eyes as she thought of the cold night not long after the Penns had returned to New York, when she had been awakened by the pull of the stars, which hissed and cracked like an icy waterfall, and were dancing all over the sky, brighter than she had ever seen them. She was only 4 or 5 and had to stand on tiptoe to see out the window. It was then that she looked out over the lake, and she learned the true meaning of the word arise." It's like a whole book of this stuff. I mean, his writing ability I just find staggering. So yes, definitely recommend this. It's going to take you a while, more than likely, to work through, but if you like a book to have sort of on the side as you're working through other books, if you have shorter reads that you're getting through but you like kind of a project book on the side, I would highly recommend this, especially if you're a writer or an aspiring writer. He's definitely somebody to learn wordcraft from. He's just brilliant in that sense. I did see the movie version of this book, and I have mixed feelings about the movie version. One of the issues I had was it was definitely movie magicked up. It was definitely sexed up compared to the book. Some characters, they wrote in some characters that were not in the book. Like, I was kind of surprised to see Will Smith as Satan in the storyline, because that wasn't in the book that I remember. And not only that, he was just, I don't know, I thought that was an interesting casting choice to cast Will Smith as Satan, because his face is too nice and friendly for that kind of role. I couldn't help but giggle whenever he got really angry and tried to do like demonic face. It's just, you can't get Fresh Prince out of your head when when he's angry, or I just kept picturing Fresh Prince or Hitch or any of those things where he's just, oh, he's so cute. So that was odd. And the other thing that bothered me was, one of the things I was so moved by with the book was all of the fantastical realism elements that Mark Helprin sort of left open for you to make your own interpretations with, and to take from it what you would. And with the movie version, I felt like they took things that were hinted at and could have been interpreted in different ways, and they went their own direction with it and beat you over the head. Like, it's kind of hard to explain. I mean, you'd probably get what I was saying after you read the book, but in the book, it's kind of like nothing is really said that the magical, fantastical elements, it's never directly said that it has anything to do with heaven or hell or this superpower, that superpower. It's just sort of left as a unexplained mystery. We don't know where the magic is coming from. It's just there. And so you can sort of put in your own source as the reader. In the movie, they sort of beat it over the head that, oh, it's definitely heaven and hell fighting each other, and demons and angels are coming into the picture. And I'm like, what? So yeah, I felt that there were certain elements that were really beautiful in the book that got destroyed in the movie adaptation. But there were elements that I really liked in the movie. I thought Colin Farrell did a really beautiful job portraying Peter, even though in the beginning I wasn't really sure about him, because in the book Peter is not written as a movie star looking dude. He's described as being, I think, like early to mid 30s and prematurely balding. And he's not suave, he's kind of bumbly. So when you take a guy as good looking as Colin Farrell and cast him in that, the way Peter was written in the book, I was like, oh man, they're gonna sex it up. And they did. But there was legitimacy to Colin Farrell's performance, and there was one particular scene in the movie where Colin, as Peter, sees a picture of Beverly and his face just starts pouring tears. And that particular scene, I just got me in the heart so bad that I'm like, all right, you won me. You won me for that. So I would say, if you want the romance of the story, because the romance in the book is pretty shortly played. The book plays a lot more on sort of inner reflection and what is our purpose in life, and how can we make our lives important, and sort of the philosophical kind of stuff. Even though the romance is there, it's not the overpowering driving force in the story. If you want something that makes you think about life in general, and you want something that you want just really beautiful writing, I would say read the book. Although in the end I would recommend doing both, because you're gonna get good things out of either direction. Also, if you're the type of person that likes like a soundtrack to your reading, there were a couple of instrumentals that are mentioned in the book that you can play in the background if you like that sort of thing as you're reading this. One they mentioned was Brahms' Violin Concerto, and then the other one is Adieux, I believe. And I will link videos to those two down below, so you can have an idea of something to play in the background to give you the feel of the story. So yeah, I guess that's about it. I tried to stay away from spoilers as much as I could. So yeah, I hope this helped give you an idea of whether you want to delve into this book. I would highly recommend you give it a shot. It's, like I said, it's going to be a little bit of a project book, but the sentence structure and the imagery and the symbolism is just stunning. And I would definitely be excited to get into more of Mark Helprin's writings. So until the next big damn book, thanks for watching, and let me know what you think, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye guys.